Okay, name that tune. So that is a little piece called Silver Scale. It was written in 1957 using a program called Music 1, and then there was Music 2 and Music 3 up to Music 7, implemented in assembly language and machine code. And it's generally recognized as one of the first pieces of computer music, so computer-aided music. And Music One was the invention of Bell Labs scientist Max Matthews, who's also responsible for the computer rendition of Daisy, which was most famous in 2001 as the swan song of Hal as he left life. So that was also Max's piece. So Max Matthews' work marks the beginning of an extraordinary creative coevolution of music and computational science that includes not only advances in musical artistry, but also in music distribution and production. This collaboration has now reached a new landmark with the advent of new powerful tools from machine learning and artificial intelligence. And that's the subject of this evening's lecture, The Impact of AI on the Music Industry, the Newcomb Institute's 2024 Donoho Colloquium, delivered by Steve Greenberg. The Donoho Colloquium is made possible by a generous gift from David, Mickey, and Dan Donoho in honor of Dan's graduation as a member of the class of 2006. It's also a central piece of the larger mission of the Newcomb Institute, whose aim is to support and integrate computational thinking and computational ideas throughout the Dartmouth community. The Institute itself is made possible through the generosity of Bill Newcomb, Dartmouth class of 64, and former trustee of the college. I'm Dan Rockmore, director of the Newcomb Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event. The Colloquium is an ongoing series of public lectures aimed at increasing awareness of the many important and sometimes surprising places in which computational ideas are shaping our lives. This includes central contributions to the technologies and ideas that go into the performing arts. Connections between computing and music go back at least to ancient Greece, and the knowledge that that harmony had a mathematical encoding in the relative lengths of taut strings in a harp. Modern instances of this relationship is the mathematics of wave phenomena, also of importance for analyzing the kinds of signals central to surveillance and communication, which was in fact the primary inspiration for making this mathematical analysis acceptable or amenable to computation. Oddly enough, it would be fair to say that the considerations of war and defense gave birth to the use of computers in music. Dartmouth has played an important role in this coevolution. This was, in fact, the place of the development of the first portable digital synthesizer by John Appleton, who also was a co-founder of Dartmouth's Bregman Electronic Music Studio, one of the first spaces for electronic music on a college campus in the States. And the idea that artificial intelligence could have an impact on music can be traced back to the 1951 Dartmouth conference in which artificial intelligence was named. It was among the, quote, human thought activities, end quote, that the organizers of that meeting thought they might address either there or in the future. So now a little bit about Steve. Steve Greenberg has been in the music industry for over 30 years. He's noted for discovering popular musical acts such as Hanson, the Baha Men, Jonas Brothers, Joss Stone, and AJR. He's a former president of Columbia Records and currently leads S-Curve Records, a label that he founded in 2000 and then relaunched in 2007. His producing credits include his Grammy-winning Who Let the Dogs Out by the Baha Men, which I think you also bark on, don't you? Yes, you do. And Andy Grammer's Keep Your Head Up and Honey, I'm Good, platinum and triple platinum hits, respectively, as well as Grammy-nominated work by Fountains of Wayne and Joss Stone, and the multiple platinum releases of AJR, who just completed an extraordinary tour this past summer. For the AJR fans in the audience, Steve is the Steve of the single Steve's Going to London. Steve's also a writer and has earned Grammy nominations for Best Album Notes, including a 2000 win for his essay featured in Stax 68, a Memphis Story box set. In 2014, he published his first book, How the Beatles Went Viral in '64, about the Beatles' rise to U.S. stardom. And as if this weren't enough activity, he also hosts, writes, and co-produces a pop music history podcast, Speed of Sound, produced by iHeartMedia. Steve holds an MA in Applied Communication Research from Stanford University and a BA in International Relations from American University. So please join me in welcoming Steve Greenberg as our 2024 Donaho Colloquium speaker. Yeah. Have fun.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you to the Newcomb Institute for inviting me this evening, and thanks to Christine Ellen for everything she did to help make this talk possible. I've been around, as Dan said, in the music industry for quite a while and seen a lot of changes in my time in the music industry, with vinyl albums being replaced by CDs, and then, oh, that's not good. Let's start that again. So I've seen a lot of changes over the years in the way music is distributed and consumed, but really I think maybe the most profound change of all is the one that we're on the verge of right now, which is the proliferation of generative artificial intelligence. Now I'm assuming that everybody here is by now familiar with what AI is, but maybe the first time many of the people in this room heard about artificial intelligence being used in popular music was the infamous Drake Weekend fake release that came out last year. That track wasn't composed or recorded by either Drake or The Weeknd. They had nothing to do with it at all, but it replicated their sound using generative AI, and it was posted by a TikToker named Ghostwriter977, and it received millions of listeners and views on all kinds of platforms before it was taken down at the insistence of Universal Music Group, which owns the rights to the music of both artists. And at the time, Lucien Grange, the CEO of Universal Music Group, declared that the unlicensed use of AI-generated voices and styles is a form of identity theft. And let's hear a little bit of that just for a second.
All I know is you couldn't have the world, yeah, you were my world. Got these girls on my neck, got these girls on my check.
So the main impact of the Drake Weekend AI-generated recording was that it freaked out the music industry. Record labels, recording artists, songwriters, everybody was wondering, is this some kind of watershed moment that's going to signal the end of their livelihood? And there was a blanket condemnation of AI as not being real music, as it was artificially created. But what is real music anyway? With the exception of the human voice itself, and I guess playing percussion by clapping and stomping your feet, pretty much all other music created by humans uses some technology invented by humans. And pretty much all of those new technologies, whether they were drums or flutes or electric guitars or synthesizers, caused a little bit of confusion at first listen. And ultimately, every one of those innovations changed the way music was played and what types of music could be played. Even things you don't think about at all, like the introduction of the electric microphone in the 1930s, caused a huge revolution in the way people sang. Back before the invention of electric microphones, all recording was acoustic, and singers would sing like this into a big acoustic horn. And if they sang live, they projected loudly the same way so that the crowd could hear them over the band. But then the electric microphone came along and led to the rise of the crooners, singers like Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, who kind of sang like this and were very intimate into the microphone. And that was just not a thing before electric microphones. So that was a massive expansion of the type of music that the human voice would create. And it was the result of a technology that wasn't even invented for recording music. It was invented for use by radio announcers. So the rise of the crooner was an unintended effect. And every new technological innovation in music has had the same kinds of unintended effects. It's no coincidence, for instance, that the electric guitar was invented just a couple of years before the dawn of rock and roll. Looking back, using the electric guitar that way seems inevitable, but at the time, it was just somebody inventing a louder guitar. In the 60s and 70s, synthesizers were developed that created new sounds that literally no one had ever heard before in music. And at the time, they were considered just weird. But today, they're very much part of the palette of popular music. And the same is true of digital sampling that became popular at the dawn of the hip-hop era. And auto-tune on vocals at the dawn of this century. Auto-tune originally was invented as a way for singers who were less than perfect to cheat on their recordings. But now it's just a tool the way an electric guitar is a tool that makes an interesting sound and causes different music to be made than would have been made without it. The point is, new technology inevitably means new forms of music, and we generally can't guess what they might be. Which brings us back to artificial intelligence and the Drake Weekend deepfake. The truth is that while AI will have a profound impact on the future of music, it's likely that deepfakes like the Drake Weekend mashup are mostly a sideshow. While there's novelty right now to the idea of being able to make music that sounds just like your favorite recording artist, I suspect that ultimately imitating famous musicians will be akin to imitating famous painters. And if I told you that I had just made a new painting that looks just like the style of Picasso or Van Gogh, you might be curious for a second, but you wouldn't hang it in a museum. Nobody values forgeries. And anyway, while you can imitate famous musicians, you couldn't really do it in a way that was genuinely creative or as moving as the genuine works created by the actual people. Songwriters and recording artists don't work in a vacuum. A person might write a song about flowers, but maybe they just had an argument with somebody and that informs the mood of the song. Or maybe they stubbed their toe or just read something in the news that upset them or delighted them. And a million other things. And all those things at that moment impact the songwriter's mood and the mood of everyone else involved in the creative process. And that impacts the song. The stuff of life is what humans bring to the equation. So telling an AI to write a song about flowers in the style of Taylor Swift, well, Taylor Swift never wrote a song in a vacuum. And there's no such thing as a generic Taylor Swift song. But that's what you'd get. And that's what the Drake Weekend recording is, generic. Every piece of creative work generated by any creative person is generated within a very complex series of specific circumstances that the artist is experiencing at that moment. Now, using synthetic vocals or music created by AI in the style of a famous artist can have value if the human creator brings something new and exciting to the table. A student I spoke to this morning actually brought up the idea of this kind of endeavor being the musical equivalent of fan fiction. So, like, can you make a song with generative AI using, say, the voice of Elvis Presley as an interesting sounding texture, or maybe that voice is singing the hook to a style of music that didn't exist in Elvis's lifetime? In that instance, Elvis's voice becomes a kind of sample. Like when you sample a drum part from a James Brown record on a hip-hop record, right? That Elvis example could certainly be interesting, and it might even be art, depending on how creative the person is who does it, or at least it could be fan fiction. In any event, there's legislation called the No Fakes Act that's moving through Congress right now, and that aims to protect the voice and likeness of individuals from unauthorized AI-generated recreations. So that hot piece of musical fan fiction using the voice of Elvis Presley will need to be licensed by the people who control the Elvis Presley estate before it could even be released. People are actually already using AI in this permission-based way. My friend, the producer Sam Hollander, used AI to have the rapper Flava Flav of Public Enemy rap in 22 different languages by sending audio of Flav rapping to rappers in 22 different countries, who then sent back themselves doing Flav's rap in their own language. And then Sam's team created a model where they converted that to Flav rapping in all those languages. Here's AI Flava Flav rapping in Amharic. Now let's get past the sideshow. What's the real use of generative AI going to be in music? How will the technology be used to create something that could not have been created using previously available technology? For instance, the major labels envision a future where a majority of the music on social media platforms like TikTok will not be professional music, but will be the creation of regular users. Not users making things that sound like Taylor Swift, but users just making their own original music, no matter how good or bad it is, by feeding prompts into AI programs. And those music companies want to get paid when that happens. Users are going to be able to make those TikToks because generative AI is potentially the most powerful utility ever put in the hands of musical creators. It's a utility whose sheer computing power allows the creative process to unfold much more quickly, and in some cases that enables doing things that would be far too daunting for a human to even attempt alone. Kazi Kazakov, who's Google's former chief decision scientist, explained it to me another way. She suggested that generative AI is like a drug for a creative person, allowing the artist to put on a pair of goggles that allows him or her to see things in a whole new way by presenting the artist with potentially endless number of possibilities to consider that the artist never would have imagined on their own. AI can do that easily with music because music is, at its core, as you all know, math. It's quantifiable and measurable, and it's highly systemized. So in the course of composing, AI is able to suggest the next note or the next chord or whatever, the same way that your smartphone suggests the next word when you're writing a sentence. So it's a tool that will have the effect of democratizing access to music making in a way that nothing before has ever done. You know, in my lifetime, the single biggest evolution in music making was the switch from analog music to digital music. We went from playing music which required physical skills. You had to actually learn to play the guitar or the piano or the trumpet. And then that required some physical skill that you had to master using some part of your body, right? And with digital music, you didn't need that. These days, any music you can imagine, you can make happen on your computer. And now that we have the additional tool of AI, that will further broaden what you could do using even fewer physical skills. But while you won't need physical skill, what you will still need to make truly great music is creative talent. Just as you still need talent to make worthwhile music on your computer, you're going to need it if you use AI and you want to make something that has the ability to truly move people in an original way. It's been said that progress is when any idiot can do what it used to take a genius to do, right? Well, I think that applies more to the utility function than to creativity. Greatness still requires spark and taste. I had a discussion about this recently with Amanda Goodspeed, who's Meta's former head of creativity, and she emphasized how crucial taste is to the creation of art. In fact, taste is what ultimately makes an artist. It's as important as pure musical skill when you're trying to make music of value. If anybody here has studied or practiced art, you know that art is mostly about making choices. Generative AI can make thousands of choices incredibly quickly, but it can't exercise artistic taste, at least not yet. So humans and generative programs begin to collaborate, and it's very likely that AI will start to serve as a kind of sounding board for human ideas, as well as making its own musical suggestions, part of a feedback loop. Both the human and the AI will be making and evaluating each other's suggestions. Now, I produce records for a living, and a lot of that job is just sitting in the back of the room and every once in a while saying, yeah, that's cool, or no, try something else. That job is actually really important because without the right person doing that job, you could end up with something that sounds professional, but you don't end up with anything that's kind of inspired. Amanda Goodspeed pointed out to me that the taste function is often actually the sum total of multiple people's tastes, right? There's songwriters, there's singers, there's musicians, engineers, producers, and they all have tastes that they've been exercising in real time in the creation of music. In Amanda's opinion, AI could spit out some catchy sound-alike Taylor Swift song, and we know it's already creating the kind of low engagement music that gets used behind the scenes in TV shows or in YouTube advertisements, but not music that comes from the heart, using creativity and skills that so many talented people put into it. Not everybody agrees with this, by the way. Chris Mattman, who's a former NASA engineer who I spoke with about this recently, has a completely different point of view. He believes that generative AI will eventually learn the creative process itself. He believes that if you give it the infinite catalog of songs, that it will, over time, internalize the very idea of taste and be able to generate it. Albert Einstein famously said that genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration, and there's no doubt that AI can easily do all the perspiring for us. The question is whether it has the ability to be inspired. In any event, generative AI will certainly lead to new genres of music and maybe even new musical sounds. AI can generate lots and lots of terrible ideas really quickly, and then those ideas can be dismissed by the AI or by a human creator until something with promise emerges, and then the human can work with the AI to refine that idea so that it's something that might be appealing to people. So I could, for instance, say to a generative AI program, I want you to come up with a brand new musical instrument sound that no one's ever heard before, but that people will really like. And there's a chance that at some point in the process of doing this, a new musical sound will emerge that will change music, the same way that the electric guitar or the synthesizer changed music. So now let's turn to what this creative revolution means for the music industry. Generative AI is able to create new music because it's ingested millions of pieces of musical information by scraping the internet for any musical sounds it can get access to. A lot of this music is under copyright and owned by someone. So even if a generative AI program created a brand new piece of music that didn't sound anything like Drake or The Weeknd or Taylor Swift or any existing artist or piece of music, that AI program was still trained on lots and lots of copyrighted music. One way to describe all the music that goes into the creation of AI music is by thinking of AI at music creation as sort of like sampling on steroids. Essentially, AI is using millions of micro samples from countless songs to come up with something new. So instead of a few samples on a record, like in hip hop, there's millions and millions of them, and you can't even identify them because there's so many of them and they're so micro, but they're there. Now, the music industry long ago figured out how to get paid when artists use their material as samples in music. So now the industry is determined to get paid for the raw material that goes into the training of generative AI. Remember, it doesn't matter if the output resembles your copyrighted music. What's important is what went into the program. One way to think about this process is to imagine a giant pile of cement that looks just like a big dust pile, and then to imagine a skyscraper. That pile of cement looks nothing like a skyscraper, and yet the skyscraper couldn't have been made without using the pile of cement. And that process is all fine because the builder, presumably, paid for the pile of cement. Right now, the music industry is highly focused on getting paid for their pile of cement. And by the way, just like the relationship of a pile of cement to a skyscraper, there are, of course, a lot of other materials that go into an at-scale generative AI model than just the raw materials of the songs. In fact, most of the model consists of logic controlling things like recursive checking, data preprocessing, etc. And those things mean that the choices are being made by those who design the model, which will help determine what the model can do, like whether it's allowed to imitate Taylor Swift or not, for instance. Now, the concept of whether using large data sets of copyrighted music without permission in order to train AI would be permitted as fair use under US copyright law is currently being tested in the courts via lawsuits, including one by Universal Music Publishing and a few other publishers who've sued Anthropic for infringement, but it's totally unclear how these suits will be decided. It's worth noting that people imagine that eventually songs could be watermarked so that they'll be identified if they're used as part of an AI model. And that could happen eventually, but of course there's already millions of songs that have already been ingested. In the face of the development of generative AI, the music industry predictably scrambled as it all happened so quickly. So a lot of experimentation with AI got shut down so that the companies could preserve their rights to sue in the future. The music industry loves to sue new technology. They've been doing it for decades. They're always scared about new technology, which is always going to destroy the music industry, and then never does. For the past 3 years, I was in a joint venture with a couple of large entertainment corporations, and one of them at one point sent out a memo saying that no one could use anything at all that incorporates AI. And this applied not just to music, but also to video and artwork. And I experienced situations where I had artists with each of those things, artwork and video, not music, that they were unable ultimately to get released because they were generated by AI and they were shut down by those companies. Of course, that approach leaves the music industry vulnerable to a repeat of the Napster era at the turn of the century, when the industry was intent on shutting down Napster instead of figuring out how Napster represented what was then a new economic model for the industry, the sharing of digital music on the internet. The record business consequently lost 40% of its value in 10 years. Ultimately, the labels had no choice but to make a deal with Apple's iTunes store on Apple's terms because they were so desperate to survive. Now, a lot of people think the music companies made a mistake not being more supportive of AI from the start, and that the development of new markets will be way more profitable in the long run than suing. And it appears that the major labels are now coming around to this conclusion themselves. So now the industry's dominant position is, okay, we'll give you permission to use our music in this way, training your models, and you're going to pay us. We're going to license our music to you, and we're going to get a royalty on every piece of new music that gets generated. And because so much is going to get generated, even that micro royalty is going to add up and be a significant revenue opportunity for the music business. What's most tantalizing about this imagined future is that it's all going to happen at scale. In the next few years, much more music is going to be created than was ever created in the entire history of mankind. We're going to start to experience new sounds and new genres, and at a certain point, the question is going to be, what's the rate limit for the human ear? Like, how many new genres can we consume? How do we sift through it all? Some source, whether it's a company or an influencer, is going to have to help brand these new forms of music and artists and raise up stars and help guide music listeners. And all of this will happen because of math. Cassie Kazakov, who I mentioned before, suggested this thought experiment. What if most people so far are found to enjoy numbers between 0 and 1? And you set up a random number generator that'll pull between 0 and 1 all the time. And you know that humans tend to enjoy that. But unfortunately, there's very little novelty there, so that starts to get boring. So instead, you can have a distribution that sometimes pulls from between 0 and 1, and sometimes it goes to 17 or -6 or whatever, and those weird ones, they're very high on novelty, which humans like. But that novelty doesn't mean it's good novelty, because you don't really know if it hasn't been tried before, because it's novelty. So as you increase the novelty, you increase the weirdness. So you need a lot more filtering at that point, because the system itself can't predict how the weird ones are going to do with the public. So the whole point of them being novel, again, necessitates human taste, which is going to become a crucial element in the system. The NASA scientist I mentioned earlier, Chris Mantman, believes that pretty much anything you can imagine will ultimately happen with generative AI, because the difference between AI and you and I is that AI is all the humans, and you and I are each only one human, right? Generative AI has been trained on all the humans and all pieces of art. It's been trained on data that's not even public. It's been trained on real people and on fictional characters. So in fact, he really does believe that anything that can be thought of eventually will be thought of by generative AI. When I make records, sometimes we hold these songwriting camps where we get a whole lot of songwriters together and we try to write a song, or several songs actually, a whole album's worth of songs, for one artist's project. And when we do that, we always say that the key rule of the camp is dare to suck. Don't worry about anything being bad, just make a suggestion. If it's bad, we'll just throw it out. Don't be shy. AI is constantly generating hundreds of millions of ideas that are eventually going to lead to whatever its final suggestion is. But it's doing the dare to suck thing really, really fast. And it's getting past the suckiness really, really fast as well. One thing for sure is that there will arise a new generation of creators who will have direct access to the public, the same way that a generation of amateur video creators did a few years back, which really wasn't possible before YouTube came along. And now, by the way, over 50% of all video consumed in the world comes from user-generated sources, not professional sources, which is a seismic change. Now, for creative people, being in a collaborative process with AI will almost certainly be the dominant mode of engagement. Just like it's no fun watching two computers play chess against each other, people who are interested in being creative won't want to outsource that experience to machines. They'll want to use machines as tools, not as replacements. The only people who are likely to want to turn over the entire process to generative models are people who, in fact, can't offer or don't need much creativity in the first place. The opportunity here for the music companies is that they already own the best databases of copyrighted songs. One course of action for them is to make their own AI generative models, turn their copyrighted material and metadata into very structured data in the form of tables with rows and columns, and then either sell that data to AI companies, sell bricks instead of concrete, or start their own business that puts that data to work. The 6 largest companies in the AI field, all tech companies, will have spent approximately $30 billion in the next 12 months acquiring data or license to intellectual property. So that's the real opportunity for the music companies, not suing the AI business. And on top of the foundational AI models, we can imagine people building apps that will be compatible with those models. Today, the App Store is a $1 trillion economy. So you'll absolutely see enormous amounts of revenue coming out of new applications that get built using AI, featuring new consumer experiences, novel forms of entertainment, different business models. Chris Jacome, who's the head of AI for WME, one of the world's largest talent agencies, noted to me that in 2023, there were 20 billion pieces of generative AI content created. And during the first 90 days of 2024, there were nearly 100 billion creations using generative AI tools. And we're barely beginning to scratch the surface, obviously. So it's likely that just as with video and user-generated content, a majority of the music we consume in the near future will at the very least have been co-piloted by AI. Finally, for those still worried that human beings will eventually be cut out of the creative process, we need to discuss the concept of model collapse. Because so much AI-generated music will exist in the future, the fear is that in the future, the only new music AI will have to train on is AI-created music. That would create a very big problem called model collapse. Now, AI models trained on human text or human sound can create high-quality new products, but when you look at the statistical properties of those songs or bits of text, you can tell they were produced by a model and not by a person. They simply look different. So, simply put, model collapse is when you try to train AI on things that were themselves AI created. And at that point, it all breaks down mathematically because there aren't the correct statistical properties to the inputs, and you end up with degraded outputs. So, there's an ongoing need for new human data. And thus, there will always be a role for new artists with new taste, creating new music in new genres, with that music then being licensed out to train future AI models. So, you'll always have to go back to humans for music to continue to move forward, or music will just stagnate. In conclusion, I don't foresee a future where humans forfeit the music-making process entirely to machines, but the question I leave you with is this. In the future, will generative AI be a utility used by creative and talented humans, or will talented humans become a utility used by generative AI programs to provide fresh raw material? And I'm open to questions.
There's a hand up.
Where's that? Sure.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, no, I think that's really fascinating, and so I think a lot of what you said makes sense and focuses a lot on songwriting and the performance aspect, right? The playing of an instrument or something. Do you see a similar trajectory for human AI, interaction rather than replacement of a human job in other aspects. So, production, mixing, editing, sound engineering, all of the other facets here. Is it a sort of equal opportunity boost to, here's a new tool that people can use to make their job better, or are there situations where something may just be, somebody's job may be replaceable because it's more automatizable?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I think that anything that AI can actually do better and quicker and cheaper, ultimately AI will probably do. So for instance, somebody asked me earlier today about mastering engineers who perform the final stage of the creation of recordings. And I said that I think right now there are all kinds of automated mastering tools that people use who don't have big budgets, and yet people who have bigger budgets use professional mastering labs with great mastering engineers. And I imagine that will continue to be the case until we get to a point when the AI programs can actually master a record better than those guys who charge a lot of money to master your records, and then no one's going to want to hire them anymore. So I would say that up until AI can do the job better, I think humans are safe. And I think there are areas of music, as we touched on earlier, where I think it doesn't matter as much. Like I do think that the industry for library music, which is the sort of generic music that's used in, in kind of low budget commercials, low budget TV shows, that kind of stuff. It's not real music that's come out commercially.
Yeah.
I can imagine that industry being replaced by AI very quickly. It's already being replaced. People are already using programs to create that kind of music. So I would imagine that they'll continue to do so because nobody cares that much about that music. It's just there in the background.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hold on.
It's just for the recording, sorry, thanks.
Would you say it's possible to teach AI how to sing how you would teach a human how to sing? And if so, would you say even like music companies can get royalty on that, or would that be novel?
I think that you can definitely teach AI to sing. Certainly AI is already singing, right? If I said, sing a song about flowers, it would in fact sing a song about flowers. So it has obviously been taught to sing. I would say that the music companies would argue that if the AI was trained on the voices of all the singers that they have under contract and whose music they own, the music companies would argue that they should be paid for that output. But as I said earlier, it's really unclear whether they'll win on that kind of lawsuit. There's a lot of case law either way. There's actually like a century worth of law about whether you can essentially copyright a directory, or whether a directory can be used for other reasons. Like for instance, the phone book. You can't, and if you guys remember what the phone book was when it existed, right, as a physical thing, you couldn't put out your own phone book that was the same as the phone book that the telephone company put out, but you could take all the material in the phone book and reorganize it and say, like, here's a list of, of dentists, and you could release that to people, and the phone book couldn't sue you for using the data that came from the phone book. So there actually is case law. It's called sweat of the brow syndrome. And it does exist on the books. So I think that the people who are going to fight against the music companies will probably use that as an example of why the companies don't have right. And also, let's be honest, the music companies are powerful, but they're going to be up against Google and Meta and companies that are much more powerful and much more deep-pocketed, and companies whose entire business model depends on being able to take little tiny bits of data from all over the place and employ it. So I can imagine that this won't really end in some sort of a victory for the music companies, and I imagine that the music companies at some point very early in the process will figure out a way to work with the big tech companies.
Do you think there's a creative difference between writing songs using pen and paper versus like, for example, like with Google Docs, like the phone will like suggest words for you, which kind of fits into like the kind of AI generation. So, like, a lot of songwriters. What is like the current trend? Is pen and paper dying out?
A lot. I mean, whether it's pen and papers or your, or your computer or your iPad or your phone or whatever, I think that many writers just do it themselves, and I know quite a few writers who I won't name who love to get input from AI programs, actually, who when they're writing might say, hey, give me another word for this, or like, I'm trying to say this, but what's a better way to say it? Or if I wrote a song about this, do you think people would like it? I've seen that happen. There's all kinds of uses. I don't know anyone personally who's like had an AI program write the song, but I definitely know a lot of writers who go to the AI program for help and for, hey, what do you think of this idea? And I think, as I said, I think there is this feedback loop where the human writer makes suggestions that the AI evaluates, and the AI makes suggestions that the human evaluates, and it kind of goes back and forth.
How do you think, or what do you think about humans' inspiration is from? Like, is there like a analogy in AI music, like how the AI can get some inspiration, like the way that human do? Because like human are also like taking a lot of outside samples and get some inspiration somewhere, maybe maybe not from like other music, but from the daily interactions they're pursuing.
There's no doubt that everybody who makes music today has been inspired by all the music that came before. All the people who are in rock bands have listened to lots of rock bands, and their job is to make something new out of that and not just regurgitate it, right, if they want to be successful. I guess, there is that notion that there is still a spark of inspiration that humans possess that AIs don't yet possess, but they certainly could eventually. And that notion of taste, meaning, you can say, I've listened to 100 rock bands and I love them and I want to make that kind of music, but if you don't exercise your own individual taste and say, hey, I just did this rock song and I think this part is good and this part is bad and I'm going to change this and I'm going to, I think this is cool, I think people are going to love this or whatever, you're not going to really succeed. So I think that's the piece that still has to be human-led, which is taste. Anybody?
I'm one of the mastering agents that you're referring to, that people pays big money to work on their music. And the concept of AI being better is really not applicable, in my opinion, because we are different. They are paying money because I'm better than anybody else, but it's fit to their aesthetics. So that's the reason that there are tons of mastering engineers around and still make a life. So I don't think that's the necessary concept of AI being better than people. People can be different. And another point that I want to make is that the big problem that I have on the discourse in the generative AI is the lack of recognition of the pleasure of creativity on humankind, because there are two faces coin that make music to sell, but also we make music to please ourselves. So in that part, it's not going to disappear. So if you consider the 20 centuries of music making, there's only one century that enable us to support ourselves as a musician. For the 19th centuries, we are all dependent on somebody else who support the musician. So unfortunately, we're going to that direction, but still people exist to make themselves like, enjoyable while they're doing the creative process. So even on the generative AI being flourished, I think still we're making creative stuff and enjoying ourselves.
I agree with you. I think one of the reasons why the human will never leave the system is because humans like to create. Musicians like to make music. And the idea of saying, well, I could make music, but a machine can also make it, so I'll just let the machine make it, doesn't really make sense if making music is the thing that makes you excited. Of course, it's like, obviously there are all kinds of things that can be made by machine, and yet many people still choose to make them by hand, and they're great. So I think that's going to continue.
Hey, um, two parts. Yeah, I think that the imperfections are what make so much music that appeals to people in mass, makes it great. But as you said, AI is going to eventually learn those things. The horse has left the stable. Um, the question I had for you is kind of specific. Have you seen much movement from the PROs, publishing rights organizations, towards figuring out how to watermark all this massive existing work, and how close are we to seeing that from
Well,
your
I
perspective?
know that there are definitely projects underway to watermark for sure. And I also spoke to a professor here this morning who said that he feels that it's already, with some AI models, possible to reverse engineer and figure out what has gone into them. And he says that there's actually a little bit of a cat and mouse game going on where people who want to find out what's gone in are figuring out how to crack the code and find out what music went into an AI model, and that the AI companies are actually trying to continually change their algorithms and change their systems to keep from being caught. So I think that that's probably going to continue until we get to some point where there's a licensing model that emerges.
So, given that the current status quo, and this is all clear as mud right now, but the status quo is that AI products are not copyrightable. Do you see any business model where the output is actually still a product, or is the product of the music industry really going to be creating training data?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that products created by AI can't be copyrighted is maybe the thing that will save us all, right? Because think about it for a second. You could easily make a program that looks at every piece of copyrighted music that currently exists and then says to the program, I want you to create 3-minute songs using every other possible combination of notes and every other possible combination of chords, right? You could do that. And if you did that, and if you could then copyright that, the product of that work, you would in effect be copywriting every single song that has never been written yet. And there would be no songs left for anyone ever to copyright in the future. So the only thing that's between us and that is the fact that you can't copyright things created by AI. By the way, when I talked about companies not letting us put out AI-generated artwork, that was one of the reasons that they gave to not let us do it, because this particular company insisted on copyrighting everything that came out. And because the artwork was generated by AI, they couldn't copyright it, and they therefore did not want it to come out. So that, that's for sure. That's for sure an issue, the fact that you can't copyright a thing that's made by AI.
At what point would you consider AI to be actually creative and not just taking pieces of creativity from other people?
I think that the line is going to be a little bit of a blurry line, but I think that when we get to a place where AI truly creates something that doesn't sound like anything that we've heard before, but is pleasing and people really like it, and it moves music forward. Maybe it's a new genre of music that we haven't thought of, not just a regurgitation or a combination of existing genres. I think we'll know it when we see it. I think that when AI makes a song and it makes everybody cry, when AI makes a song and it just gives everybody chills, I think that's going to be the time. Right now, AI can make things that sound quite professional, and they can sound quite like other things that people like. But I've yet to hear an AI-generated song that's made me cry.
To your point that currently that there's most music being made is between 0 and 1, and now we can get music that's 17, -6. In kind of the much more into the future, do you think that will affect, how do you think that that will affect the culture of pop or just music in general in terms of pop stars? Will that create, right now, in the future, will there be more of a wider range of music with stars that aren't as popular, or will it still be kind of what we have today with people like Taylor Swift, who like everybody knows?
So I'm going to answer that in two parts. First of all, I think that because AI can go through ideas so quickly and novel ideas so quickly, I would imagine that the ability to create sort of new sounds that we hadn't considered yet, but that we actually might like, is quite likely, right? Almost more likely than people doing it slowly over time, because it's just doing it really, really, really quickly. So all those negative 17s and also the mistakes. I think a lot. AI, as we know, hallucinates, makes mistakes, and I think sometimes the mistakes are going to be the thing that's going to be the inspired work of art, because it was a mistake. But in response to your question about mass artists versus niche artists, I guess, which is really the question, I don't know the answer really, but I kind of hope that we will hit upon some new development that will help bring back the mass. What I've seen over the decades is that we tend to go in cycles where sometimes the culture is very mass and everyone kind of knows more or less the same thing, is excited about the same thing. And then sometimes the culture becomes very fragmented, and that usually all coincides with evolution in technology. Like, for instance, and I'll just give you a quick rundown of the last few decades. We went from everybody listening to the same AM top 40 radio stations in the 60s and 70s to suddenly radio becoming a very fragmented format when FM radio proliferated, and there were just all these stations that were for little micro audiences. And all of a sudden, nobody knew the same music as the 80s dawned. But then, all of a sudden, MTV happened. And MTV, there was only one MTV. So because there was only one MTV, they kind of played everything, and everybody watched it. And there was all of a sudden, once again, a period of mass culture in pop music, which was very exciting. And it was Michael Jackson's Thriller and Prince and all these things. And people look back at that actually now as a golden age of pop music, the mid-1980s. But eventually that fragmented as well. But then as you go further into the decades, YouTube happened. And when YouTube first happened, it was kind of intended as a more mass medium, and YouTube was very intent on the notion of trying to sort of create mass hits and aggregate mass audience. So you suddenly had big phenomena like Call Me Maybe and Gangnam Style and all these things that created a big sensation in the culture. But then YouTube, because of its need to charge as much as it possibly could for advertising, right, started to fragment what it delivered to different people in order to charge higher rates to more targeted audiences. And you're never going to see another Gangnam Style or another Call Me Maybe come out of YouTube in that same way where the whole culture rallies around a thing that they saw on YouTube. TikTok, when it first emerged before the pandemic, again, because they wanted to aggregate audience, delivered the best TikToks to everybody. And that's how we ended up with Old Town Road, one of the biggest hits ever. And that came from TikTok because everybody saw that on TikTok. But then TikTok, of course, said, well, we want to also make the most money we possibly can on advertising. So we are going to start being much more targeted, and TikTok became a much more individualized content delivery system, so that the idea that something as big as Old Town Road could emerge where that everybody knows is not going to happen. I have two daughters, and a couple of summers ago when the artist Noah Khan, who, fairly local, I guess, emerged. I remember one of my daughters, and they're both, they're sisters, they live in the same city. One of them said, "Oh, I can't believe this. All I ever get on my TikTok is Stick Season by Noah Khan. I get Noah Khan singing Stick Season. I get covers of Stick Season." She goes, "I don't mind it. I like the song. It's fine, but it's all I get." And my other daughter was standing next to her, and she said, "Let me see that. What are you talking about?" And she took the phone and she looked at some videos of Stick Season by Noah Khan, and she said, "I have never ever been delivered a video of this song in my life. And I'm on TikTok all the time." So TikTok has really become this highly individualized thing that doesn't really have the potential to foster that kind of mass phenomenon. It's much more niche. So long answer to your question, I always think that when something new comes out, there's the potential, because the something new kind of wants to attract as much attention across the culture as possible, that the something new, at least temporarily, causes the culture to come back together and causes the mass to reemerge. And I always root for that, because the mass is more exciting. You know, I met once with about a year ago, with the head of TikTok in Europe, who said to me that the biggest mistake that people make about TikTok is when they call it a social network. He said, there's nothing social about TikTok. It's an individual content delivery system. We don't care what your friends like. We only care what we think you're going to like. There's nothing social about it. And I worry, because obviously I do think that there's an isolation culturally in the society, and it would be great if everybody could rally around something again. So who knows?
I know there are already genres like lo-fi, which have intentionally degraded sound quality. In an age of AI-generated content, do you think there will be a shift in consumers towards music that sounds more human and more intimate and maybe less technological or high quality?
I think definitely. I think that there's always a reaction to everything, right? So I think that for sure, highly professionalized music, always leads to a sort of lo-fi response. I remember in the early 80s when synthesizers became dominant in pop music, synth pop, acts like Duran Duran and the Human League became the biggest acts, that all of a sudden there was a big reaction, and an act like the Violent Femmes came out that was acoustic. And people were so excited because it was acoustic. They were playing acoustic guitars. This is so exciting. So I do think that there's always a reaction back and forth. I think that, hi-fi will always engender a lo-fi reaction. And I think that, machine sounding will always be responded to with human sounding. So yeah, I think there's going to be everything. But there's no reason why AI couldn't be generating the human sounding stuff too. Why can't AI just do some record that sounds like a guy with a kind of slightly out of tune acoustic guitar? No problem.
One last question. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So, based on what you just said, what do you think about the AI-generated Randy Travis song?
I'm going to tell you that I don't know the AI-generated Randy Travis song.
Okay.
Oh, please! What could you tell us about it?
Randy lost his voice because of illness about 7 years ago. And he never made any new single. And then the record label find out the AI technology that makes everyone's vocal like Randy Travis. They approached the software company and let very professional Nashville singer to sing the old Randy song that was never released, and then asked the converted data from the company in UK. They received it from them to make an album. That's the start of it, and it took 3 months to finish it because it was nothing like Randy, because it's not just the timbre of the vocal, but his styles and everything. So it's been a lot of things going on after they converted the vocals of Randy. I participated in the mastering part of it, but that's the gist of it.
Wow. What's interesting is I just read this week there's a renewed interest in the last released Michael Jackson recordings, because there is a suspicion that they were actually generated by AI and not by Michael Jackson. And so there's a whole question about whether those final recordings are real at all. And I guess, to be continued.
But the Randy Travis song is being played on country music radio, and everybody knows that it was AI generated.
I would say no. I would say that there's no reason why people can't enjoy that, but I would say that probably there's a degree of novelty to that. I think look, maybe when you do have an artist that nobody can get new music from anymore, that AI-generated version of that artist could fulfill a need among that artist's fans for some period of time. But I do think that people like music or any art that's made by a person. When I hear music by Taylor Swift, I know that it's coming from a person and their experience. When I see a Van Gogh, I'm thinking about Van Gogh and what he may have been thinking, what he was experiencing in his life. And it's the same with any work of art, I think, or work of music, that you're hearing it and you're kind of on some level imagining the person who did it and what they might have been thinking or going through when they did it. And with AI, there's just none of that. And so I think that is still an essential difference between AI and human-generated music, is that ability for other humans to relate as humans to the creator of the piece of art, which we can't do because we're not machines when it's AI.
That's a great finish, Steve. All right, thank you. There's food outside? Is that true? There's food outside. Everybody thank Christine and Danielle for putting this all together.